What is up, guys? It is time for a late slate sweat and swap show where you may have guessed it. The topic of conversation today is going to be all about James Harden, but we will dig into that in a second. But first of all, I'm very disappointed in the one person who disliked this video. That hurts me personally. Second of all, I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man you saw on this channel just a few short hours ago, giving you everything you needed to know for the main slate. He's back again. He couldn't resist himself. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Well, the NBA slate could be going a little bit better. Not that I thought this one was going to go particularly well before we started, though. I was like, because the other thing, too, so DraftKings ran the biggest contest they've run of the entire year, and I had a ticket for it, so I had no choice. It was just I had to play this slate. It was a slate I would have preferred to not have played, but then I already had a ticket for that. It's like, all right, I might as well build lineups. But I'm looking at the slate. It's like, this is going to be garbage, especially because we didn't have the Harden news before lock. And then yeah, I mean, I don't know how the value play. I have a bunch of exposure to the Nets value guys that we're talking about in a little bit, but so I got a bunch of those, which let me get up to just a bunch of Luka Doncic and Giannis, which that's poor so far.
I am so upset. I had 50% James Harden on FanDuel, I think a bit more on DraftKings, and that was with me capping him at 10% exposure while crunching 1,500 lineups. And this is sort of the stuff we talk about here on the Late Slate Show. And keep in mind, one news item that you guys aren't aware of that we learned about today, which makes sense given the fact MLB will be back next week. So it looks like we are on the last few days of these Late Slate shows before we have a ton of MLB content, adding more time to our talent and our hosts and our producers. I think it's funny that I just referred to anybody on this channel as talent, myself included. But our talent and our producers are going to be overworked with MLB. So the Late Slate Show will probably take a little hiatus next Wednesday. I think that's going to be the last one, barring some changes here. We'll see. But this show right now, we are going to talk about the Late Slate itself. We're going to talk about the main slate. And I just want to give you a little taste here of where my head's at, because James Harden, yesterday we debated so much, ended up getting in. Today he got ruled out fairly early, but not early enough that you can kind of go in with a game plan for the entire slate and how you're going to approach things and the value. And I ended up with a ton of PJ Dozier, who is mediocre. I also ended up, as Greg did, with a ton of Luka Doncic. And Greg, I'm going to just read off the names on DraftKings that are ahead of Luka Doncic right now. And this will fill probably more time than it's comfortable, but I just want to do it for the sake of while we have this show, because it's something I can do. People ahead of Luka Doncic, who right now on DraftKings has 2.75 DK points in about a quarter and a half of basketball. Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, Tyus Jones, Facundo Campazzo, Patty Mills, Saban Lee, Desmond Bane, Ryan Arcidiacono, PJ Dozier, good for him, DJ Augustine, Teo Maladon, Kobe White, Cameron Payne, Ricky Rubio, Quinn Cook, Reggie Jackson, Jalen Noel, Devontae Graham, John Morant, Jeff Teague, Ty Jerome, DeJounte Murray, Edward Sumner, Tomas Satoransky, Kemba Walker, Michael Carter-Williams, Chris Paul, TJ McConnell, Fred VanVleet, Marcus Smart, Drew Holiday, Dennis Smith, Jalen Brunson, Darius Garland, Lou Gwentz Dort, who is somehow point guard eligible on DraftKings. How about that? Delon Wright, Malcolm Brogdon, John Wall, Jamal Murray, and Kyle Lowry. Greg, how does that make you feel to hear all those names read out loud?
I mean, you could have just, here's the list of people who are scoring less fantasy points than Luka Doncic.
Me and you.
That's it. We got them. Those were all of them. We hit the crew.
It is one of the most amazing situations I think we've probably ever seen here in fantasy sports. But honestly, I think I'll wear it as a badge of honor that I have gotten killed twice within this week. Once by Luka Doncic, once by James Harden, that game that he had, I think, last Friday where he put up 40 fantasy points. I just am, it's unbelievable, Greg, I think is really where I'm going to leave it at. And it's trade deadline day, so some craziness to be expected. But maybe that's the thing with Luka, is that he's probably in all sorts of trade rumors and he's deeply concerned about his future in Dallas.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the case. But meanwhile, who it hasn't impacted is the Raptors. The Raptors were up 20 points on the Denver Nuggets. Kyle Lowry is actually not really doing that much. Norman Powell's having a pretty solid game. But yeah, I mean, that was one team. It's really funny too, because one of the reasons I got to OG Anunoby on the slate, one of the only things that's going well for me right now, is because I thought there was a chance that Norman Powell and Kyle Lowry would only play a half of today's game and they were going to get traded at halftime or something was going to happen. So it was one of the reasons I landed on OG Anunoby. Then he just hit all of his shots in the first half and scored 18 real life points. So yeah, just somebody who I liked he was also a little bit underpriced, but one of the main reasons I liked him, he's having a good game for just totally unrelated reasons.
Yeah, that's the fun of DFS, and today is probably one of the more DFS days we're going to have. But let's start talking about the Nets. And here's a question we'll take from Jordan, who is a YouTube member, which we appreciate a bunch. If you're on the desktop version of YouTube right now, you can see the join button underneath your like button, your share button, all those things. And first, you should be smashing that like button here. We got 250 people in the chat. We're going to give away some ownership projections at the halfway point of the show. So smash that like button here. Get us to at least 100. We appreciate it a bunch here for the dying days, or at least the resting days here of the Late Slate Show. But also, we do have this question. I think it's one that's going to be pretty common from Jordan in the YouTube chat, where you can join yourself. We'll see your questions a bit more. But he's asking, I have Halliburton, Harden, and Claxton for my one lineup for the main slate. Who do I change and for who? And this is a FanDuel question. And Greg, you and Josh talked about this earlier on the Live Before Lock show. Bit of a different equation on FanDuel where you have Harden in there. And if you go to Bruce Brown, you're going to leave, $6,000 on the table. So on FanDuel, if you had Halliburton, Harden, and Claxton for the main slate, what would you do? And how could you possibly even get remotely the approximation of value of Harden being in?
I mean, if we're being honest, the lineup is most likely dead. But you go from James Harden down to Donovan Mitchell. That is $2,900 then in salary savings. And then Halliburton, I would leave as is. So then Claxton, who's power forward eligible and what's the price on Claxton? Claxton is $5,000. So you could get from Claxton up to John Collins. I guess that's is there enough salary to do that? Yeah. So you'd go from, what was hard? I have to do all this math in my head that I wasn't planning on.
I'm also watching Luka Doncic miss free throws on on my laptop. Right, so I'm having a lot of fun all around.
Yeah. There's nothing you could do, looking at the pricing other than go from Harden to Mitchell, and then I guess you could go from Halliburton down to Bruce Brown, and then you go from Claxton up to Collins, just so you use all your salary and don't leave like $3,000 on the table. So yeah, I guess that's the pivot I'd make now that I've done all the math here real quick. Is you go from Harden all the way down to no, that doesn't work either.
No, you go Harden.
So you go from Harden to Donovan Mitchell, then from Halliburton down to Bruce Brown, and then Claxton up to John Collins. Does that all follow now? Now that everybody's listening to me do real shoddy math in my head.
So Halliburton's a shooting guard on FanDuel. I played FanDuel today, and I honestly didn't know he's a shooting guard.
Yeah, Halliburton's 5,700 shooting guard. Bruce Brown is 5,000. I think Halliburton is a much better play, except the other option is he's just leaving like $2,900 in salary on the table.
We talked about this yesterday, I think, we definitely have talked about it a little bit on some of the shows, and I mentioned on the tip-off show with Eric yesterday as well. But on FanDuel with this, on DraftKings, we've previously discussed, and I mentioned yesterday that Awesemo has mentioned on some of his game plan videos, which are part of the premium package at awesemo.com/join. So check out all of the data on there, really. Check out all the information about that, different packages, the express package, the main packages on there. You go weekly or monthly. You could even go yearly if you won a nice tournament recently and just want to invest in the cheapest option on there. But lots of different data packages on there. And we talked about the game plan video with Alex saying that for late swap, you ideally, at least on DraftKings, want to have 3 roster spots. For FanDuel, I know you and Josh said on the Live Before Lock show earlier that you guys would basically take Harden out of the pool. Is there any way to pre-plan on FanDuel for this kind of thing? Because if you have 2 shooting guard spots, there's nothing you could do. But if you had 1 shooting guard spot with Harden and then 1 shooting guard spot with a cheap point guard, you could have upgraded to Fox or, Trae Young or really whomever. And I think that's one key difference on FanDuel and DraftKings. There's obviously many, but how would you handle late swapping or prepping for a potential late swap on FanDuel?
Every slate is different. So for this one, like you said, I said to just take Harden out of the player pool. The reason being is because unless you were really confident in either Harden playing or sitting, I didn't think there was a reason to be overly confident in either of those situations. But let's say you were really, really confident Harden was going to play, then yeah, you could leave him in. But to me, it was such a 50-50 proposition. And then you look at the situation right there that somebody just asked us about, where it's what do I do with Harden now? And there just are no options because of the way the positionality works on FanDuel, where you have to go, the only options, you go all the way down to Donovan Mitchell. And by the way, Donovan Mitchell, the Jazz are probably going to beat the Nets by a billion points now, and Donovan Mitchell probably doesn't play the fourth quarter. I know we talk about how it's hard to predict blowouts, but what's the spread for that game out now? It's probably 15 points or something. So, I mean, that's about as likely as a blowout as we're going to get. Nets playing on the tail end of a back-to-back with no Harden line up to 14 points now. So, I mean, you just consider all of that, and Don Mitchell isn't a good play, except you were left in a situation where if you took the chance and played James Harden and waited until the later games, you were just out of luck because you have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, the Jazz are up to a 13-point favorite at home against the Nets. And the Jazz historically have run their teams into the fourth quarter a bit more than other teams because of the passionate home crowd or whatever you want to. I don't even honestly, I think that's the reason why, but could just be a Quinn Snyder thing. Who knows? But they are a 13-point favorite. I think Greg is right. I still am inclined to think or try to find configurations that assume the Nets keep it close. And I guess we could start to talk about that now. And again, guys, we're going to give you guys some free ownership projections, top 5 on DraftKings and FanDuel, as well as, I guess, the showdown slate / single game slate on FanDuel. So smash that like button now. The single game includes Brooklyn and Utah on DraftKings, and I guess that's the main one on both sides. So hit that like button now. Give us some likes here. We'll give you guys those numbers in about 20 minutes. But let's start talking about Brooklyn because this is going to be the difficult one to unpack. And yesterday, it did seem like Bruce Brown was a play that I think we were a little bit too high on just because of the minutes insecurity there. He did project for, I think, about 28 minutes from Awesemo, ended up seeing closer to 23 minutes because he got it not ejected early, but got taken out of the rotation early because of Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, I guess, being a better fit for what Steve Nash was seeing. But today, Greg, with no James Harden, I think, again, you have to go back to Bruce Brown and assume it's going to be closer to Detroit Bruce Brown, who had 50 fantasy point upside in a lot of games, rebounds, assists well, does get up his shots. I think Bruce Brown is the one net I would consider to be a necessity, even though I think you make cases elsewhere. But how do you feel about that? Are you going heavy Bruce Brown?
Yes, I went heavy on Bruce Brown for the main slate. I think it makes a lot of sense for the late slate. Tyler Johnson's still a priority play, though. Tyler Johnson, I expect he's going to start. I don't know if we got a Nets starting lineup yet, but I mean, if we remember yesterday, even though Harden ended up playing, remember we got that news yesterday where if Harden doesn't play, Tyler Johnson is going to start. So that's why I assume that Tyler Johnson is going to start at point guard today. I still think that Chris Chiozza is going to get some minutes. I don't think it's going to be something where we see Tyler Johnson play like 34 minutes or anything like that, but I expect him to play enough minutes to at least be one of the better value plays on the slate. So he's my second favorite net, or actually second favorite guard on the Nets behind Bruce Brown. Claxton is my overall second favorite net, though.
So you were down on Claxton yesterday, if I'm remembering correctly, but today you're in on him. So I guess what's the argument for Claxton being a little more worthwhile given, I guess, the assumption that DeAndre Jordan's still going to play his run here? Claxton in for 23 minutes from Awesemo, Jordan in for 25. So I don't disagree. I just feel like I'll let you take the floor to make the case.
Yeah, so the big difference yesterday was that Blake Griffin was in the rotation, and I figured that Blake Griffin was going to get a few more minutes, and that could I thought that could potentially take away from Claxton. Claxton didn't play a ton yesterday. He was just so effective when he was on the court in the minutes he got that it didn't matter. So Claxton only played 21 and a half minutes yesterday. And that was, I think I had him for 20 minutes, if I remember correctly yesterday. But if you told me he played 21 and a half minutes yesterday ahead of the slate, I would have said he's a bad play at whatever it was, 30% ownership at only 21 minutes. I wouldn't have thought he was a good play. It didn't matter because he had 16 points and 9 rebounds in those minutes. But now I think we could comfortably give him more playing time with Blake Griffin resting.
Got a super chat here from Miami Mike 305. We appreciate all the super chats, as well as all you guys being in chat, whether you are super chatting it or not. And super chats are one way to get seen. Being in the premium Slack, you could be a part of at awesemo.com/join, whether you're doing an express package or one of the higher dollar packages, you're getting that membership on there. So that's another way to get seen. And of course, joining the channel, it's another way to make sure that we're seeing all your chats. It's just honestly a color coding visibility thing, which makes us sound like grade schoolers, but actually is very helpful when you're running a show. But I think this question's interesting. Thoughts on Alize Johnson, who's available to make his Nets debut today. He is a guy who's played, I think was playing for Indiana last year, has played some time in the league, not the gigantic or the most gigantic sample size, but could see some minutes. And I think, Greg, what you were talking about with Blake Griffin being out, I think that does open up a little more for Claxton. I think Tyler Johnson is going to be in the mix, obviously, as a guard. Alize Johnson, though, as a forward, I don't know that he gets a gigantic bump here. He's going to be projected for 16 minutes by Awesemo. Even if I have him in for 1 fantasy point per minute, which is what I have based upon his per 100 possessions rate data, I don't think he's that good of a play. I have him for 15.6 fantasy points. I think Awesemo has him in for 14.2, so a bit less bullish on him. Would you play an Alize Johnson when you have value guys like Nick Claxton, when you have value guys like Tyler Johnson, like Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot? I think you're forcing it a little more than you probably need to.
He is not on the slate. He is rosterable on FanDuel, but not on DraftKings. So
he's 3K on DraftKings.
There's a notice up on Fantasy Cruncher that he is not on the slate. Let me see what that shows in. He's 3,500 on FanDuel. I'm going to look on DraftKings to see what the deal is with him there when I actually look in the app. But if you look on Fantasy Cruncher, there's a note that says we're aware of an issue with Johnson of the Nets on the 324 NBA slate. Johnson is not on the late slate for DraftKings. You'll need to remove him from your player pool. So let me see what it says when I actually go
he's not.
into.
Yeah, you're right. He was available on the main slate. He's not available on the night slate. That makes no sense at all.
No. Okay. So there's a confusion. That's why he's in Fantasy Cruncher, because he was on the main slate, but not on the late slate. So yeah, that's super goofy. If your question is FanDuel related, I think at 3,500, that's too cheap of a price tag, too steep of a price tag for Johnson. If he was 3,000 and playable on the late slate, then yes, he would have been viable for the 2-game slate. But when he's not in the player pool, it doesn't matter.
Eric Gilbert asking an interesting question in the YouTube chat. We're going to jump around, take some questions here because I think the Nets situation is going to yield itself to a lot of questions. And we're up to 420 people in chat, which nice number here, but make sure you guys are hitting that like button here. Get us to 100 likes because we are giving you guys the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for the night slate for free coming up in about 14 minutes. So help us out. Get us to a respectable 100 likes so we can look in the mirror and not absolutely hate ourselves every day. But polite LA saying, by the way, Tyler Johnson, I see him on the late slate. Tyler Johnson is available on every slate. Alize Johnson was only available on the DK main slate. He's not available on the DK late slate for reasons that make mostly no sense. This question from Eric here: should I pivot off of Nets chalk value in lineups with Luka, or is the upside too high? If you pivoted off of them, like there's nobody else on the late slate, I think, who has that kind of upside, I guess. Bielitsa, the minutes don't seem like they'll be there. In the Hawks game, you are going to get no Rajon Rondo, but I don't think that benefits Brandon Goodwin enough to get in there. So, Greg, I would say you have to ride with the Nets value and hope that it's going to be a bit less owned than maybe you would have thought going in. But how do you feel about that? Would you pivot off of any Nets value in lineups where Luka's, killing a lot of people dead in the water, it seems?
I don't think the Nets value is going to be crazy popular because, number one, it popped up late. We always see late swap players go under owned generally. But then number two, just there aren't other good options. Like there isn't a pivot that makes sense at this point in the day on the main slate. I assume that you would need some sort of min-ish or really cheap price plays. And there is just nobody who makes more sense than plays like Bruce Brown, Claxton, Tyler Johnson. So to me, it has to be the Nets guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're just losing another guy in Harden who, if he were in today, and we talked about it yesterday, but his rates without Kyrie and Kevin Durant, 35% usage of 14%, a little bit more than that rebound rate, 55% assist rate, I think was actually a little higher, and I marked it down to 55 because got to keep it reasonable. But the guy had 17 assists yesterday, so there's a lot to go around here for really all these guys. And I agree. Like, I don't know how you get that same value. Like Tony Snell is 3,100 on DK. And like, is Tony Snell going to be the one who gets you there over Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot? Maybe, but he doesn't get you there over Tyler Johnson, doesn't get you there over Bruce Brown. I think doesn't get you over there over the collective value of the Nets. So I don't know. Maybe you limit your number there and get one guy to get different. But I agree with Greg. I think these guys probably aren't going to be as owned as they should be because people just didn't want to deal with it today.
Yeah. And then it's another thing too. Think about when the news came out. It came out like 7:48 or something like that, the Harden news. So number one, a lot of lineup spots were already locked, or if people weren't quick enough to make late swaps, like everything locked like 10-ish minutes after that. So there wasn't really a spot where I think that people were able to get to the Nets players, at least not at the clip that they would have had the Harden news came out on the 5:30 injury report.
Jacob Kimball asking some questions about power forward on the FanDuel late slate, pointing out that it is, in fact, an incredibly ugly one. And I'm going to pull it up now so we can go through and we'll talk about it here because I know we have a lot more FanDuel players recently. I've extolled the virtues of FanDuel a little bit more in some of the shows that I've been doing recently here as a lifetime DK player. I've been trying to diversify a bit more and having a fantastic time on FanDuel. Greg, I don't know if you heard you probably didn't watch Tip Off because you hate us all so much. But I feel like with the Tip Off today, I mentioned with FanDuel like that. With DraftKings, when you make one mistake value-wise, it's like having really strict parents who immediately just kick you out of the house when you do anything wrong. Whereas on FanDuel, you get one value play wrong, and FanDuel just embraces you and goes, hey, we still got a bunch of other spots here, buddy. You'll pick it up. And I feel like that's the way things have been going for me on FanDuel, where seemingly whatever mistake I make doesn't kill me, even on bad nights where it's like a break-even prospect at best.
I like how you are really in this honeymoon phase with your new DFS site.
Yeah, we're making out every day in public. We're doing gropies at the bar. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about FanDuel recently. We'll see how that goes today with Luka completely crapping the bed for me at 75%. But power forward on FanDuel for the late slate. We'll talk about it here. We got John Collins, we got Jeff Green, we got Nicholas Claxton, Royce O'Neal, Alize Johnson, who Greg talked about earlier, Nemanja Bjelica, George Niang, Reggie Perry. We're now in the doldrums of guys, Nathan Knight, guys who probably won't be seeing meaningful minutes today. What would you do at power forward on FanDuel? I think it seems to me like very much a John Collins, Jeff Green, Claxton Knight, and I guess you're mixing in some Royce O'Neal, but I think really the main reason you get to Alize Johnson is to open up money, and I don't think you need to open up that much money on FanDuel, so I think you're mostly sticking to the top four, but how would you handle power forward on FanDuel's night slate?
Yeah, so I mean, our friend Jacob Kimball, he's saying the power forward position is terrible. I don't think it's that bad. I think that Collins is a little overpriced, except we're going to get fantasy points at him. At least Claxton, I think he's a good value. Jeff Green, I think he's a good value. So the two priorities relative to price are going to be Claxton and Jeff Green, and then Royce O'Neal and John Collins, lower priority options. The real bad position on FanDuel is small forward, where we have DeAndre Hunter, the most expensive small forward at 6,300. Likely not playing more than 20 or so minutes. So it's Hunter at 6,300 as a bad play. Harrison Barnes at 6,000. There's a reason he's picking up 64% ownership. Then we've got Danilo Gallinari at 5,700, probably not playing all that many minutes. Joe Harris, no hard in there, except you figure it could be really hard for Harris to generate his offense. So Harris, Bogdanovich, like the small forward options are really miserable other than Harrison Barnes.
Did we haven't gotten news. Oh, we got news that Gallo is playing. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind here. We also got the news that Rondo's not playing. So I mentioned that earlier, but just keep that in mind for the point guard minutes, maybe a little bit more for Trae Young, more assist upside in that second unit without Rondo. But I guess Brandon Goodwin picking up a few minutes. But just wanted to keep that in mind here. Yeah, small forward does look pretty trash. I think Bogdan's okay. Gallo, now that we know he's in, is okay. Really, the night slate on FanDuel, I guess this would be where my arguments for FanDuel recently and being so pro FanDuel kind of fall apart. The night slates on FanDuel, I feel like, are much uglier than the night slates on DraftKings in terms of just playing guys that you actually want to play.
Yeah, so there's two issues with it. Number one, well, it actually goes hand in hand. The reason you don't get to play guys you want to play is because you look at the small forward position, you don't want to play any of these guys, and you have to play two of them. And then the other issue, too, is because of the roster constraints, there ends up being so much overlap in winning lineups on 2-game slates on FanDuel, whereas that doesn't happen on DraftKings because there's so much more positional flexibility that even on 2 games, there's enough lineup different iterations where it's viable to be able to create a unique lineup. That's not to say you can't on FanDuel, except oftentimes there's going to be massive ties for first place on FanDuel. The ways to differentiate are either you leave a bunch of salary on the table or you just take a crazy punt on somebody who's min price and you just hope that they end up falling into like 20 fantasy points and it creates a way different lineup build than other people have. But other than that, it's really, really difficult to build unique lineups on FanDuel for 2-game slates.
DJ Cruz saying, I think the Nets need Johnson more than Claxton tonight. I don't know how you could have seen enough of Alize Johnson to make that assessment.
I think he means Tyler Johnson. Right?
Okay. I agree with that. I don't, if he's saying Alize though, I would disagree with that. Cause you never know you gotta get your Johnsons right, I guess, in any sort of walk of life.
Yeah. And are there more Johnsons on the slate too? Let me think. Tyler Johnson, no other Johnsons.
Yeah, no other key Johnsons at least. There could be a 15th man Johnson in the mix.
No other, just 2 Johnsons for us today.
We're a Johnson and Johnson place like many others out there. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think so. If you're talking, by the way, about Clax or Tyler Johnson, I guess that's a question from Ryan Durkin here that we could answer. Do you feel like Claxton is a better player, Tyler Johnson? I think you'd have to go Tyler Johnson just because there's a lot more opportunity in the backcourt than the front court. I don't have any issue with Claxton though.
I said before, Bruce Brown is my overall favorite play on the Nets, Claxton 2 and Tyler Johnson 3.
Okay. EMAC, by the way, in the chat saying page 6, Spags and FanDuel were seen canoodling recently while in line for a post-yoga Shy Tea. EMAC got a lot of assumptions incorrectly there. I am not a Shy Tea guy nor a yoga guy, but I'm a post-Peloton beer, perhaps me and FanDuel. Look, I'd give FanDuel's got that sexy graphic. I like their logo.
Man.
That's a sweet curves on that D.
It's only a matter of time before Spags calls FanDuel fat and it ends up blowing up everywhere.
That's when we break up, and it's like more like Fat Duel, and then it's all the cycle starts all over again. But thanks, Greg, for bringing that one back to me. How many nets is too many in the night slate is a valid question, and I think it's a 4-person cap for me, but realistically, I think 3 is probably what gets you in a winning tournament lineup. But how do you feel about it, Greg? Because you could honestly make the case that you have a 7 or 8 usable Nets players in terms of a median projection basis.
I don't have any lineups with more than 3. And I didn't even set a rule. That's just the way in the lineups I made that they're coming out. Also, these guys are so cheap that like if you roster like 5 Nets players, you're not using all your salary. And there's a pretty large opportunity cost there. It's also not a great matchup against the Jazz. So these guys are viable because they're cheap enough, except it's hard to envision there being like 4 or 5 Nets that are the highest scoring players on the slate. So it looks like a lot of my lineups are built around where it's like a few cheap Nets players, and then it's like paying up for De'Aaron Fox, Clint Capella, Trae Young.
Yeah, I think Gobert is another one that I don't mind paying up for because I feel like there's a certain floor there. I know on DraftKings I got a good amount of Gobert and Capella lineups for the late slate just because where else are you spending your money? And centers certainly have the upside, I think, especially in this spot. Like Gobert should, if Brooklyn sucks, or just even Brooklyn, if they play what they play, like if they play reasonably well or decently, they're going to miss a lot of shots because you are losing your most efficient scorers for Brooklyn. And I think that opens up a lot of Gobert rebound opportunity. And same thing for Capella, different scenario though, where Sacramento just not that good of a team in terms of shooting. They are a much better team than the shorthanded Nets should be. But I think a 2-star center lineup for me on DraftKings soaked up a lot of that salary, and you have your guards and you have all that stuff too. So lots of ways to do a quality lineup construction on DraftKings. On FanDuel, you're going to be playing a lot of crappy players and probably just need to accept that. In terms of Nets, I guess to kind of close the loop on them, if you had to only play one for whatever reason, Greg, and I think we talked about enough about these guys and you ranked them, you gave all that where you had Bruce Brown first, Claxton second, Tyler Johnson third. But if you had to choose just one for whatever reason, people trying to get different, people trying to just get the net who's going to have the most upside and not take some of the middle tier value or guys who maybe don't have as much of a ceiling, which net would you take?
All right, so this is a little different question than my favorite net. My favorite net is still Bruce Brown. However, if you're only going to take one net, here's why I think that Claxton makes the most sense. So in a scenario you're only playing one net, I think it's probably reasonable to assume you're making a lineup with only one Brooklyn player because you're kind of playing for the game script of the Jazz end up winning the game by like 30, 35 points or something like that. And we don't see the starters. That might be a little extreme, but basically it's a blowout and starters don't play the fourth quarter. In that scenario, I think that Claxton would still be somebody who's both part of the regular rotation and would play garbage time minutes. So if you're just trying to play one player who as a standalone has the most upside and it doesn't really matter on the game script, actually, you could even argue that Claxton benefits the most from a blowout because instead of going up against like Rudy Gobert, he's going to be playing against the back of the Jazz bench. So if you're only playing one player as a standalone, I think Claxton makes the most sense from a game theory perspective.
And I think in terms of the regular game itself, like Claxton grades out to me pretty well going against a sleepy Derek Favors, I feel like is what, not to steal our former president's nicknames for his competitors, but I feel like Derek Favors is kind of the ideal guy going against Claxton, who's all energy. His guy's going to put up a lot of shots, and Favors is just going to kind of stand there and get his shots at the rim, get some easy rebounds. So I think Claxton to me looks like a good play on his face that could get better. I think though, for me, if I had to choose one net, I would still go Bruce Brown just because, historically looking back at all these guys, like, yeah, maybe Claxton has that upside, but he's still gonna have DeAndre Jordan playing 18, 15 to 20 minutes, even if it does get a blowout ahead of him. So I think to me, that puts enough of an inhibitor in front of Claxton, whereas Bruce Brown, I think is going to be playing point guard. He's going to be rebounding. Harden leaves behind a 14% rebound rate. I don't think all those go to DeAndre Jordan. I think they go to a guy who's shown that ability to do it with Bruce Brown. He's been a good assist man in Detroit too. I think he's shown the ceiling in the past, and even the G League too was like a pretty competent, distributor and rebounder and scorer. I think this is sort of the blank canvas here that he can do the best with, but I don't have any issue with Greg's guys, and really any Nets player you're probably not going to have any issue with. Let's do the ownership projections here because it is money time here in the back half of the show. So I will flip my hat and Tyler will hit the sound effect whenever he stops looking at Tinder or whatever he's looking at right now. And there we go. Thank you, Tyler. We are on to the top 5 owned plays for the night slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. And smash that like button some more, guys. Get us as many likes as we can. If we only have another week left of these late slate shows before MLB starts, let's make it count here. So hit that like button if you ever tune into these shows in the next week. Trae Young, number 1 on DraftKings, 53%. Number 2, Tyrese Halliburton at 49%. Number 3, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot at 48%. These are Awesemo's ownership projections, by the way. They're not going to be 100% perfect, but as good of an approximation as you're going to find out there. Number 4, Clint Capella at 47%. And number 5, De'Aaron Fox at 46%. Greg, accounting for the ownership here, we have Trae Young, Tyrese Halliburton, Luwawu-Cabarrot, Capella, and Fox. That top 5 on DraftKings. You have one that you're more inclined to fade or at least get under the field on than the others?
Fox, and it's not even that I dislike him, but I'm just so much higher on guys like Clint Capella, Trae Young. I know those guys were popular also, except these are still guys that I think warrant being over the field on more, and that would bring me down on Fox, and that's at least how my numbers are here right now running lineup. So, I think Fox warrants the least ownership of those guys.
We also just got the Hawks starting lineup. No surprises. Young, Herter, Snell, Collins, Capella, but just want to make sure we got that out there. For me, the guy that I would come in under is Tyrese Halliburton, and I think he's a fine play. I think he still projects well, even with me docking his rates a bit. I just think I luck boxed the other day with Halliburton where he shot 11 for 15 from the floor, didn't contribute a lot in terms of rebounds or assists. I think to me, he's going to be a bit overvalued because he had that nice day against Cleveland, because he was running good there. I just don't know that I see the biggest upside for him. I think with Fox especially. So I would come under there and probably a little bit higher on Fox, but that's neither here nor there. For FanDuel, though, the top 5, Donovan Mitchell, 72%, Trae Young, number 2 at 71%, De'Aaron Fox, number 3 at a rounded up 71%, number 4, John Collins at 68%, and number 5, Harrison Barnes at 64%. So on FanDuel, we've talked about this before, Greg, but you got Mitchell, Trae, Fox, Collins, and Barnes. Out of that top 5, is there one you would come under on, knowing the fact that the positions, for the most part, especially for guys like Barnes and Collins, do outright suck?
Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, I look at the lineups I built here, and Harrison Barnes comes out as the most rostered player for me, which isn't really a surprise because we talked about before the other small forward options. They're so miserable that it makes it just about impossible to get away from De'Aaron Fox and kind of, you said John Collins is in that top 5, right?
Yeah, John Collins is right there too.
I'd rather go to Claxton and Jeff Green at power forward, so that would make Collins a little bit less of a priority.
Okay. I think Collins might be the one I would come under on, just because I think you could maybe leverage against him with Trae, with Gallo, with Bogdan, with Capella, the most obviously. So I think that's one I would come under on, but it's really not that. I think you got to play a power forward, and Collins is probably the best power forward, but I hate Barnes too, but I could see how he would be more of a necessity just to build a competent, well-projected lineup across the board. And if you weren't going to play Barnes at small forward, is there a value play that you would play that has some upside? I mentioned Bogdan before. I think he's the one. I really feel like if you played both Bogdanoviches, I don't think that's the worst move in the world if you weren't going to play one of Barnes or Harris or Luwawu-Cabarrot.
Well, we just got the Nets starting lineup. TLC, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, is starting for the Nets. It is okay. Tyler Johnson, Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, and Jeff Green. So reading the tea leaves here, you know what the Nets strategy is going to be other than just outright losing? Is they're going to shoot as many threes as they can in the early going and just try to create variance. So I look at that actually. I'm kind of curious. If you go to sports books and, there's always the alternate lines where it's like, even if the Jazz are favored by 13.5, like there are some books that have lines where it's like Jazz minus 20. I'm kind of interested in that just because I think the Nets are going to try to create as much variance as they can by looking at the starting lineup just by chucking threes.
Yeah, I think that's not a crazy thought at all. And that's sort of the March Madness. We got March Madness going on right now. We still have our March Madness DFS projections and shows going on the channel. And I feel like that's March Madness in a nutshell, just popping threes, letting it go. That's how Detroit had some good days or decent days, I guess, where they actually did beat Toronto that one game and pretty handily. That was just jacking up a lot of threes. So I agree. I think they're going to go 5 out and just see if anybody can knock down shots. And DeAndre Jordan, Greg, I guess I might not try to play any DeAndre Jordan if you can at this point. If you had him in, he got a projection bump for me just because he was in for minutes before. And I think, the assumption is just somebody has to pick up some of that rebounding slack, maybe a little bit of scoring more. I think Jordan might not play meaningful minutes. And I guess if he does play, he probably has to play alongside Claxton now.
Yeah, I don't think that. Actually, DeAndre Jordan, they might just rest him tonight. That I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but I think it's in play. I would definitely take DeAndre Jordan out of the player pool at this point. Much higher on Claxton. I think he's the better option. By the way, Jazz -20 is only +250, +250. So a terrible, terrible line there. Like I thought it would be a thing like, oh, I wonder if it's like 6-1 or something like that. But no, it's not nearly enough. Not nearly enough odds for me to want to make a play on that. But anyway, yeah, as far as DeAndre Jordan goes, I still think Claxton's going to be ahead of him in the rotation. And I mean, if the game ends up being a blowout, which we definitely think is a possibility, it's going to be Claxton in garbage time. So I think the minutes floor is very, very low for DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't feel the most comfortable playing Jordan at all. And I have some faint concern that somehow this squeezes Claxton a little bit more, but I'm actually just going to global swap on DraftKings Jordan for Claxton, and on FanDuel, I guess I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go fuck myself. I'm just going to go and just not play. Like, am I going to global swap to Hassan Whiteside now when they also have Kabengele, or do I global swap to Favors? None of those look pretty good for my handful of DeAndre Jordan lineups.
No, those are not good options. This is a suboptimal 2-game slate where there could potentially be a blowout taking out 50% of the games.
I am global swapping my DeAndre Jordan on FanDuel to Hassan Whiteside. I just don't have confidence. I think this could be a surprise rest day. That's not really a rest day here. We also said we'd give away the showdown ownership projections / single game ownership projections. So we'll give those away now too. And we appreciate all you guys tuning in here. So smash the like button while we give away basically all this free data to you guys. And you can always get it yourself at awesemo.com/join. But number one for the showdown slate on DraftKings, Donovan Mitchell, 90%. Rudy Gobert, number 2 at 84%. Mike Conley, number 3 at 56%. Bruce Brown, number 4 at 49%. Joe Harris, number 5 at 48%. And Greg, I'm going to ask you, instead of the guy who doesn't belong here, because really you have to probably play at least 2 of those core Jazz guys just because of the salary you would leave behind if you didn't play him. Captain wise, Bruce Brown, 8% owned. I think he'd be my pick for the low owned captain, but we do have Tyler Johnson under 5%. We also have your boy Claxton under 3%. So what would be your captain pick for a DraftKings showdown to get different? Or would you just take Donovan Mitchell or Gobert as the 2 chalk options?
I'm going to see something really quick. I'm going to bring up the showdown because aren't you just leaving a ton of salary on the table if you go to Bruce Brown? Like, is there a way to use it? Like, is there any way to use a majority of the salary with Bruce Brown a captain?
No, I think, but you're able to get Mitchell, Gobert, and Conley in there. And I think one of Joe Harris or Jeff Green. So I think it's still a viable construction, but I'm more comfortable leaving money on the table for a showdown just because if I think Bruce Brown is 40, 50 fantasy point upside, I think having him at captain is better maybe than the Mitchell as a chalk play at least.
All right, so here's the problem. Bruce Brown is 8,100 as the captain. Then you put Conley, Gobert, and Mitchell in. You have 7,150 as your remaining salary. So then you pop in these guys. There's Jordan Clarkson at 7,400, Joe Harris at 72, Ingles at 7,000, Bogdanovich 64. So I guess if you really want to differentiate, you go with Claxton here at 44, and then you have 9,900 left to just go to Clarkson, Harris, and Ingles. The issue if you go with Bruce Brown, we've talked about this before, if you go with Bruce Brown at captain and use all of your salary, you're building the same lineup everybody else is building with Bruce Brown at captain. So if you want to differentiate, I'd say you play Nick Claxton at 4,400, and that's going to leave you like about 3,000 in salary on the table. And that will at least give you a little bit of a different lineup than most people with Bruce Brown. But I think if I want to go different, I'd rather go with Mike Conley at captain.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting choice. I feel like the issue I have with Conley is that he's got to get there with points and assists real fast, and just his permanent numbers, I think, would still make me favor Mitchell as the captain. I don't know what you're doing to get different if you have Mitchell as captain, because everybody, like the most profitable players, are going to have enough of Mitchell at captain, I think, and then whatever configuration of nets, that pretty much every possible configuration of nets. I guess, what are the captains you wouldn't play on DraftKings? We'll give the FanDuel single game ownership in a second here, but like, is there anybody you wouldn't play a captain because you know it's going to be like pretty much all the bases covered?
No, but here's what I think: you could make creative lineups even with Mitchell or Gobert at captain if you just play a bunch of really cheap Nets guys and leave a bunch of salary on the table. The lineups that I would not make is if you just play some random value play. Basically, let's say any net who isn't Bruce Brown, Nick Claxton, or Tyler Johnson. if you go with any other Nets play, I think that's probably too far off the board.
Also, a random thought for you, but who shoots the most threes for the Nets today, do you think? Because we talked about the variability of all that. You don't have Shamet, you don't have Kyrie, you don't have Harden. I feel like it's got to be Joe Harris as the chalk choice, and maybe that makes him the most volatile and most upside play. And we really haven't talked about him at all, but I guess the two-part question then, who do you think shoots the most threes? And then does Joe Harris become a better play because of the way that we're thinking about this, and we haven't talked about him at all? And honestly, he doesn't project as well as everybody else.
So here's the issue with Joe Harris is I'm going to bring up the Nets numbers really quick here with all of the Nets guys off the court, just so I have them in front of me. But Joe Harris doesn't create his own offense.
Right.
So it's not like he benefits a ton, in my opinion, with Harden and Kyrie off the court, because I think he really needs that facilitator to be playing with him. And I assume the numbers are going to bear that out, but I could be wrong. So I don't have them in front of me, and I'm just going to pull them up so that we know. I'm actually going to say Tyler Johnson, just because he's starting at point guard. The ball starts in his hand. So to me, that makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it's Joe Harris, but I think more often than not, it would actually be Tyler Johnson in this matchup, as long as he gets the minutes.
Luau Cabro, I think, would be the dark horse here. This is something you could bet, but I'm just curious what your thoughts were, because I do think Luau Cabro could get the most, but he doesn't create his own shot either. And to your point about Joe Harris, this is a fun fact. 100% of his 3-pointers made this year have been assisted, which doesn't seem possible, but that's the number that's here.
Yeah, that's gonna be hard to do for this particular slate. Let's see. So his usage rate with I have to take Karis LeVert off the court too. I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be not a lot of minutes left on this team after this. Like there's not going to be a whole lot of sample size with Karis LeVert, Joe Harris.
It's going to be Joe Harris is a 50% usage rate in 5 minutes.
All right. Who do you? Oh, this is actually really funny. Who do you think leads the Nets in usage this year with LeVert, Irving, Durant, Harden off the court? You're not going to get it. It's somebody who's not on the team.
So it's the full season sample.
Yes.
Is it Rodion Kurucs?
No, it's Taurean Prince.
I was thinking either Kurucs or Jared Allen, but Taurean Prince makes sense because he was shooting a lot in Cleveland too when they traded him.
So Joe Harris actually a 24.8% usage rate when Harden, Durant, Irving, and LeVert are all off the court this year. It's only 74 minutes though, so hard to really pull too much from that. Of the players who are relevant, Landry Shamet, who is also hurt, he is the second most usage. But it's pretty spread out. It's just a bunch of guys that are in like the 20 to 24% range. It's not like there's one guy who, at least based on these numbers, I don't think there's one guy who's going to dominate the usage.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that all seems reasonable to me. And interesting to note with Joe Harris, because there is, I think, to me, a world where he could just shoot himself into usefulness, but he definitely is going to have to, it's going to be just off of the limited assists that are going to come from Brown, from Johnson, from whatever else is going to be out there. Chris Chioza, I guess, picking up 19 minutes in Awesemo's minutes projection, but that's the guys who have to do it. Let's do the FanDuel single game ownership real fast. Top 5 on there. Rudy Gobert, number 1 at 99.9%. Credit to the 0.1% getting different there. 98.5% for Donovan Mitchell at number 2. Mike Conley, number 3 at 49%. Big drop off there. Number 4, Bruce Brown at 46%. Number 5, Joe Harris at 39.7%. On FanDuel, Greg, for a single game format, Nick Claxton's number 6, so he's not too far behind, but is he the guy you'd bump up here and then bump somebody else down?
Yeah, and I'd probably still bump down Joe Harris. I mean, the priority is going to be paying up for the Jazz guys still, and then I think just using the Nets guys for value. But once again, on some of the FanDuel single game stuff where there's really obvious pay up options, it's hard to really differentiate. I mean, if you wanted to go even if you wanted to get really crazy and say like, oh, I'm going to put Bruce Brown into the 2X spot, the odds that Bruce Brown outscores both Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, it seems to be a very slim proposition.
Yeah, I think with DraftKings, with the salaries, I would mind that a little bit less. On FanDuel, where you're not paying a premium to get a guy to that MVP spot. I don't know that adds a ton of value. I'm also pulling Awesemo's minutes projection here because I got to say, given Joe Harris a 24% usage rate, at least with my projections, made him look a lot better. And I'm now intrigued by the idea of how this looks because we still have DeAndre Jordan, at least in the minutes projection that we had before the show. It would have had DeAndre Jordan playing big minutes. So I'm just going to see how this affects everything. And DeAndre Jordan still in for 25 minutes from Awesemo. So that's that was an update too, right? Or did I pull this in incorrectly? Yeah, still in for 25 minutes from Awesemo. So I guess Alex probably doesn't see a way that DeAndre Jordan doesn't get some run here, but just something worth noting there. Joe Harris in for 31 minutes. And I think if you give him the higher usage in 31 minutes, I would have him scoring 1.1 fantasy points per minute and being viable. So I'm going to put Joe Harris in one night slate lineup out of the handful I built, just because he's the most volatile one. Like, he's the one, if he gets going in a meaningful way, like, he's the one who keeps this competitive at least long enough that Utah could be viable for their starters through 4 quarters.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he wouldn't be my priority play, especially because the price point is so weird on some of like the veteran Nets guys. My preference is just to play the really cheap guys or the younger guys like Nick Claxton.
Eric Johnson asking how much Whiteside we have on DK. I have no Whiteside on DK, but I got the handful of lineups on FanDuel. Greg, how do you feel about Whiteside? Because I do think trading for Kabengele could be an issue. I don't think it is right now, but it does spook me a little that you see Kabengele getting just a handful of minutes, and that's enough, I think, for Whiteside to make him look worse in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think the other issue we have to bring up here is that Whiteside is somebody who the Kings have been trying to move. And actually, so Oladipo didn't play tonight. Actually, it seems that wasn't trade related. That was, I think he had a friend who passed away. So maybe that's not the best direct comparison, but I was going to say there are some players who I think are at risk of being traded that teams are going to hold out. And I think that Whiteside already doesn't play significant minutes. I think there's a chance he doesn't step on the court.
Yeah, I think there's some real risk to Whiteside. Certainly some upside, I guess, where maybe, I don't know, Rashawn Holmes gets in foul trouble or just gets killed by Capella in a way that they just try to do something different. But yeah, Whiteside, he's in for 60 minutes from Awesemo. I think that seems reasonable. That was enough for me to get to him on FanDuel, just because out of concern that DeAndre Jordan doesn't get the run that I think Alex is expecting for him, or really that anybody might expect for him. But yeah, I think Whiteside is not a priority play, not a guy I'd want to get a lot of, even for just the night slate. People tilting about Luka and Giannis. Cal Flair asking Buddy or Halliburton. Part of the reason that I like going to Joe Harris was that I think Halliburton's going to be incredibly overowned. I think even more than we have him in the night slate. We did have him, as we mentioned earlier. Halliburton on DraftKings was projected for where did this go? I'm on FanDuel now. On DraftKings, 50% of the field is going to be on Halliburton. I just don't think, I don't know. I'm scared of this take, but I just think Halliburton really got lucky the other day, and I don't want to go back there on a day that I had so much more than the field. Today, everybody's going to be there, and I'm just afraid of him. So I would go Buddy's way, Greg, but would you prefer Buddy or Tyrese Halliburton?
I mean, anybody who has followed some of my Twitter rants about Tyrese Halliburton over the last week knows that I am a fan here, and maybe there's a little bit of bias on my part, but I think Halliburton's great, and I think he's only going to get better going forward. If we look at the last game, yeah, I mean, it was a little bit fluky what happened with him in terms of he's not going to shoot 11 of 15 from the field, except he also doesn't have to have a big game. Like, if he would have shot 8 of 15 from the field in that game, he still would have scored over 30 fantasy points. So I'm fine with Halliburton. And the other thing you could say about him also is that he didn't really have any rebounds or assists in that game. He had 2 assists and a rebound. Generally, he's a guy with a very high assist rate. So there's also reason to think that he regresses positively in that area. And that would make up for probably what is almost certainly going to be a drop in efficiency. Also, his usage was sub 20% that game. He usually has a slightly higher usage rate than that. So I think that there are reasons to like Halliburton here, especially because his minutes are going to only be trending upward for the rest of the season.
So my pushback would be that I don't think Halliburton's usage gets above 20 at all. Like, on the year, he's only at 17.3. When playing alongside Fox, he's at 16, which, you could mark up a little bit because he's going to play a few minutes away from Fox, but it's not like a straight staggering that, like, oh yeah, Tyrese Halliburton plays X amount of minutes, then he's playing on the same amount of minutes alongside Corey Joseph or whatever backup point guards, Kyle Guy. That's not the case. So I don't know. I just think Halliburton, I think people are treating him like good chalk. I know the chat's pushing back right now. I just think maybe you can get to his upside or more with Joe Harris tonight. So that's the play. I put in 2 lineups for the DK big tournament today, and I took Halliburton out of both. I had Halliburton in one, swapped him to Joe Harris just now. And in the other one, I'm just playing Fox. And I just think trying to get Fox's upside day, to me, like, that's just a much higher probability than Halliburton even getting to 40. Like, I think if Halliburton has a good day, he's at 30 or so fantasy points. And I think at his ownership, I just feel like maybe you can get that somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just like Halliburton. I still think that if you look at his numbers for the year, he's averaging just under 30 fantasy points. He averages 28.82 DraftKings points per game this season, and that's in under 30 minutes. And going forward, he's going to play many more minutes than that because he had a minutes restriction for a little bit. He was coming off the bench. So we're looking at somebody who is, for the year, scoring about a fantasy point per minute, but was playing under 30 minutes. He played 36 minutes last game, and I think he's going to regularly play 36 minutes going forward. So with all that information in mind, also a positive matchup against the Hawks, he's somebody that I think probably scores somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 to 34 fantasy points in this game.
Okay, and I think that's reasonable. I just think if Joe Harris can potentially get me 40, I'm going to take the shot at a guy who's going to be less owned and could get me 40 than a guy that I think safely can get me to 25 to 30. And yeah, I just look at his starting numbers on the year in games that he has started, which has mostly been since Bagley hurt his hand. 4 starts now, 3 starts before the good game, 18.25 fantasy points, 25.25, 26.5. And in the back 2 of those, 34 minutes in the game that he had 25 fantasy points, 32 minutes in the one that he had 26.5. I just have some cause for concern here that it's harder to get there in the current situation, but 15 shots put up last game is not a small number. So we'll see, Greg, but I think this is just one spot that I have Halliburton for the main slate, but for the night slate, I just feel like that's one that for a main slate play, I don't mind it because it wasn't that chalky, or at least it wasn't terribly chalky to be expected. For the night slate, you now know you're walking into a 50% of the field buzzsaw, and I think that gives me some concern.
Isn't it funny how that works? Like out of, you know what I mean? Like in terms of out of 11, I thought he was one of the best plays out of the whatever, how many number of players that is 11 times. So like out of 200-ish viable options, I thought Halliburton was one of the better ones. But then you get into the late slate, it goes, but then when I reduce the field down to 20 plays, like Halliburton isn't one of them.
Yeah. I think it is interesting with the ownership, and that does sort of tell the tale, I think, of how we're normally trying to approach DFS ownership, and how you are trying to find little slivers of leverage you can get against the field. And to me, I think for the late slate, Halliburton is a little bit of leverage you can get potentially, but it's you're dice rolling here. I don't think Halliburton kills you. And if you are, for some reason, if you're a masochist and playing cash slates for the late slate, then play Halliburton. But for a tournament, I just think he's one guy I'm really willing to move away from, especially with the good box score result yesterday. David Evans asking Spags, who is better, DeMontis or Middleton? I don't know if that's relevant to the slate, but interesting question, Greg. I'm actually curious which way you'd go with this as a known Eric Bledsoe stan. So I feel like you're just probably a fan of any peripheral Bucks piece.
It would be Sabonis for me, but Middleton is the better fit for the Bucks, but Sabonis is having the better season.
Sabonis is having the better season. I think I'm with you on it. The thing with Middleton is that it's very hard to put up a 50, 40, 90 year, or, close to it like he got last year. And I think that is sort of a marketable skill in the NBA. So if we're going by the modern NBA, there are probably guys who can get you double-digit rebounds and points like Sabonis does. The assist thing with Sabonis, I think, makes it tough, but I'd rather have Sabonis, but I think Middleton for the NBA. I'd actually be curious what Josh would have. I'm sure he would have some very ESPN-styled ramped-up take where he'd be like, Sabonis is trash. Middleton's the best player in NBA history because he shoots well, and I'll be back after the break.
I have a feeling that both Sabonis and Middleton rate out very well in advanced stats. Like, I know Josh loves Middleton. I have a feeling he really likes Sabonis also.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, Jordan calling back to yesterday's conversation, I think not even knowingly saying, does Utah not have a good rated strip club in the area? Maybe Harden didn't even travel with the Nets. They just held him questionable for suspense. The bus left during his last lap dance. We actually debated this at some length yesterday, Greg. So it's time to call it back. But you had one surprising finding about the Utah rankings from your revisiting of that Reddit thread about Harden and the strip club correlation based on Yelp reviews.
Yeah, I already posted actually in the YouTube chat before. I'd said to Jordan that I couldn't, I'm not sure if this was totally accurate. I said it was the third best strip clubs in the NBA per average Yelp reviews. It was either second or third. I couldn't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but I remember they were top 3.
Also, apparently, David, they're making money in the Salt Lake City strip clubs. I guess that deserves the cash register sound. David Evans saying, by the way, Greg, that Josh apparently railed against Sabonis this morning. And
oh, all right. Well, sorry, I'm not up at 4 a.m. to catch Josh's show live, but all right. So Josh prefers Chris Middleton then.
Sabonis isn't overrated. He's just, to me, like Sabonis, like every NBA player, is just a function of the situation. When you put a LeVert in there, he's going to look worse than he looked like when Oladipo was out. And that's sort of the I don't know. I love Josh. Josh and I, along with Jake Hari and Nolan, the guys who've been here, I think, with Tom and Alex and our founding team, Eddie, the longest of anybody. I love Josh, but sometimes he comes up with these guys that are overrated, and I'm like, I don't even know where you're going. Like, where does this come from?
Well, I think the other thing too is how many people are even rating Sabonis. You know what I mean? Like how many people are making a list and like pushing hard to say Sabonis is, a top 15 or top 20 player. Like Sabonis, I thought was deserving all-star this year, but there's a lot of people who go, oh, this guy's overrated, this guy's underrated. I'm like, that guy's not rated. Like most players are not rated. Most players are not talked about. Like how many people have made a ranking list recently and been like, here's where Nerlens Noel is on my list. Like he's not underrated. People don't think about him.
That's one of those things too, where I think as a DFS player, you hear about these guys more and you're like, oh yeah, like Sabonis is so overrated. I hear about him every day. But if you put him on that TNT segment with Shaq, he'd be like, Sabonis, I think is on the Bulls. I don't know. He wouldn't even know. Like it would just, maybe you hear about a guy more from a fantasy perspective and I don't know, but Sabonis, the Pacers aren't winning. So I guess you could point to that, but who knows?
Yeah. There's only like 14 players in the NBA that I think are actually rated. Like nobody cares about the other players.
Butthole Jenkins asking any Nwora love. I have Nwora love every day because I said he would play minutes and he played minutes. That's really the extent of Jordan Nwora, what you could do to predict a guy like him. And his top shot moment I found was incredibly overpriced. So I think Jordan Nwora is doing well based upon the things that he can do.
So maybe he's overrated.
he's no Domantas Sabonis or he is, I guess, depending upon how what side of the bed Josh wakes up on a given day. He'd be like Jordan Nwora, the next Domantas Sabonis for sure. Anthony asking Mitchell and Claxton or John Collins and Buddy Hield. Interesting question. I think I'd go Mitchell and Claxton, which I assume you would too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think John Collins and Buddy Hield's kind of the mediocre mid-range. I think that we sometimes talk about on the shows where you're probably more inclined to take a value play in a guy who has a pretty solid floor and a more solid ceiling. And I think that's, that's sort of the play you're making there. But Claxton has been so productive per minute, and it's hard to imagine him not getting enough minutes today that you got to go Mitchell and Claxton. Let's see. Jacob saying we might not see Lowry traded the way he played today. I don't know. I mean, I think somebody has to meet the price point for the Raptors, which is incredibly high, apparently.
I'm looking over the results, by the way, of the games now, just because we brought up Lowry. I was looking up the final box score of the Raptors game. Like, I think of the players I've rostered tonight, I think OG Anunoby is actually the highest scoring player.
Yeah, that's probably not incorrect. Right now, the highest scorers for the slate overall are Porzingis, Siakam, Vooch, Middleton, and then Larry Nance got to 44. Fuck Larry Nance. I'm so mad at some of these guys who you play them every night and then they have the outlier day when you're not even considering them at all. That's classic Larry Nance. Middleton, though, having a nice day, so good for him. He's probably out of Sabonis now.
Yeah. Oh, now Josh is right.
Jeff Green or Tyler Johnson for, I guess, a last one in for our boy Brad Levine. I think you'd go Tyler, but man, I don't have the most confidence in it, but I guess I would go Tyler.
Who are the players? I can't find the question.
Jeff Green or Tyler Johnson for Brad Levine.
Tyler Johnson for me.
Jordan saying I should do a Nwora, a scorer club. I don't want to be affiliated with Jordan Nwora for one take I said for 5 seconds to fill time on a live before lock show. So I will not vehemently defend Jordan Nwora. When Evan Mobley's in the league next year from my alum school, USC, I will do whatever Mobley competitions we could do. Mobley, no Blowly. I don't know what you would do there, but I'll play Mobley every day.
By the way, the Bucks Celtics game could end up going to overtime, and that would open up the possibility for Giannis hitting like 35 fantasy points.
Hopefully he and Luka both can get there today. They need.
Well, here's the bad news for Luka. The Mavs are blowing out the Timberwolves, and he might not end up coming back on the court. He's like 17 fantasy points.
Oh, this is one of the dumbest slates. Kemba Walker, who I also knocked down today, is the top scoring point guard on DK with 41 fantasy points. I hate it all.
Yeah, I have my one lineup in the millionaire contest on DraftKings. Like, it's not that bad. I mean, I have Giannis and Luka, but both of them are like 50% owned anyway or something like that. But they're my two lowest scoring players.
Anthony asking Halliburton or Hield. I would just go Hield for less ownership. But Greg, are you team Halliburton?
Yeah, I'm Halliburton.
Michael Knack just saying God hates me. There was some guy earlier, Chad. I think Dez is one of the regulars, and for some of the earlier shows, he was like preaching the gospel earlier in the chat. And I was like, I don't even like what is going on. We've gotten to a point now where nothing surprises me, but somebody being like, "Yeah, you gotta find Jesus and come back Sunday." It's like, wow, good for Dez, and good for good for Michael Knack, who is on the other side of the spectrum, maybe considering Satanism.
Yeah. Well, hey, we made it. We made it to lock. I think that's a good jumping off point, guys. Like, I mean, if nothing else is working for your DFS, just pray for it, right?
Yeah, it's got to work at some point, but we are locked, and people should be following at G Ehrenberg DFS. People should also be following at Chris Spags, and more than anything, you should be following at Awesemo_com. But Greg, what are the plugs here? What's your upcoming show schedule that people can tune in for?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at G Ehrenberg DFS. I'll be doing the Thursday night, the Jock Market show tomorrow with Eric Lindquist. So we'll be talking about one of our sponsors there, and that's always a fun show. Also, we'll have a slate where hopefully there won't be a whole bunch of guys ruled out right before lock, a bunch of guys going to question, but at least it's a smaller slate, and it's the trade deadline, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, and tune into the tip-off tomorrow. I'll be on there with Dr. Ben Rosset giving out all the proper prescriptions for sports betting, so make sure to watch that. And then Late Slate So back tomorrow with, I think, Eric, might be Mac, I don't even know. It'll be somebody on here tomorrow, probably your old pal, if I had to guess. We appreciate you guys. Hit the subscribe button on the way out. Hit the notification bell as well so you know whenever there's new content. And enjoy here. We are in the dying days of this Late Slate show before MLB comes back. So come back tomorrow, hang out with us, have some fun. We'll see you guys again soon. Enjoy your nights, and good luck.